1. e4, former world champion Vasily Smyslov opens with the king's pawn, seeking an open and complex game. This was the most popular and combative choice of the era, setting the stage for a theoretical battle. 1. c5, Fischer responds with his beloved Sicilian defense, his main weapon against 1.e4. He immediately creates an imbalance and seeks a complicated fight, avoiding symmetrical positions and aiming for victory from the start. 2. Nf3, the most natural development. Smyslov continues with the main line, developing a piece and preparing to control the center of the board. 2. d6, Fischer chooses one of the most solid lines, preparing the ground for his Najdorf variation. He controls the center and maintains flexibility for his pieces. 3. d4, Smyslov strikes in the center to open the position. This is the most direct way to fight for the initiative against the Sicilian, seeking to exploit his lead in development in space. 3. cxd4, the thematic exchange. Fischer temporarily cedes the center in exchange for a long-term structural advantage with his central pawn majority, a fundamental idea of the Sicilian. For nxd4, the white knight establishes itself on its ideal post. From d4, it exerts a strong influence across the entire board and serves as the pivot for white's operations. For nf6, Fischer develops his knight with a threat on the e4 pawn, forcing white's response and gaining an important tempo for his own development. 5. nc3, the logical response. Smyslov develops a piece while defending his central pawn, maintaining the pressure and preparing for the complex struggle ahead. 5. a6, the Najdorf variation. Fischer's signature move. This subtle pawn move controls the b5 square and prepares a dangerous queenside expansion with b5. 6. bg5, Smyslov chooses one of the sharpest lines, pinning the f6 knight. This puts immediate pressure on the black position and prepares a direct attack on the king. 6. e6, Fischer's main reply. It breaks the pin, solidifies his center, and prepares the development of his dark-squared bishop to e7. 7. f4, the aggression continues. Smyslov reinforces his center and prepares for a pawn storm on the king side, looking to open lines against the future black-castled king. 7. b7, the most solid development. The bishop is placed on a safe square, prepares for castling, and reinforces the defense of the king side. 8. qf3, a key move in the system. The queen supports the kingside attack and, most importantly, prepares for queenside castling, declaring an all-out fight. 8. qc7, the black queen develops to a useful square, from where it controls the c-file and adds another layer of defense to the crucial e6 square. 9. the gauntlet is thrown down. With opposite side castling, the game becomes a race to see who can checkmate the opponent's king first. A sharp battle is now guaranteed. 9. nbd7, a flexible developing move. The knight supports the center and prepares to be rerouted to b6 or c5 to aid in the queenside counterattack. 10. g4, the pawn storm begins. Smyslov wastes no time in launching his attack against Fischer's kingside, seeking to rip open the files in front of the king. 10. b5, Fischer's counterattack starts immediately. He launches his own pawn storm on the queenside, aiming to create threats against the white king before white's attack breaks through. 11. bxf6, a critical decision. Smyslov trades his powerful bishop for the knight, hoping to shatter black's pawn structure and weaken the dark squares around the king. 11. nxf6, Fischer recaptures with the knight, keeping his pawn structure intact. He values the integrity of his king's shield over the open g-file that gxf6 would have offered. 12. g5, the attack intensifies. The pawn continues its advance, kicking the black knight and aiming to create more weaknesses in the kingside defense. 12. nd7, the knight is forced to retreat, but it moves to a flexible square from where it can jump to c5, putting pressure on white's center and queenside. 13. bh3, a creative and aggressive move. Smyslov develops his bishop to a sharp square, eyeing black's kingside and preparing to support the attack. 13. b4, Fischer continues his queenside counterattack relentlessly, kicking the white knight and opening lines against the white king. It's a race against time. 14. NCE2, the knight is forced to retreat, but it moves to a square where it can still participate in the defense of the kingside and support white's central plans. 14. BB7, the Najdorf bishop is developed to its best square on the long diagonal, from where it puts pressure on white's e4 pawn and controls key squares. 15. KB1, a useful prophylactic move. Smyslov moves his king off the c-file, away from any potential checks or pins, a standard precaution in these sharp positions. 15. NC5, Fischer's knight leaps into a powerful central outpost, attacking the e4 pawn and creating new problems for white to solve. The pressure is mounting. 16. Ing3, Smyslov defends the e4 pawn and brings his knight to a key attacking square. From g3, the knight can jump to f5 or h5, creating direct threats. 16. D5. The counter punch. Fischer blasts open the center. Instead of waiting passively, he creates chaos and challenges white's control, a typical Najdorf strategy. 17. F5, Smyslov accepts the challenge, opening the position further. He hopes that the open lines will favor his attack, but it is a double-edged decision. 17. Dex4, Fischer captures the pawn, opening the d-file for his pieces and creating a strong passed pawn on e4. The position is incredibly sharp. 18. QG4, the queen moves to a more aggressive square, putting pressure on black's kingside and preparing to join the attack on the open files. 18. East x5, Fischer eliminates the dangerous f5 pawn, opening the e-file for his queen and further exposing the white king. The tactical complications are immense. 19. NDX f5, the knight captures the pawn and lands on a powerful attacking square, eyeing the weak g7 and h6 squares. The white attack looks very dangerous. 19. G6, a crucial defensive move. Fischer is forced to weaken his kingside pawn structure, but he challenges the powerful white knight and shores up his defenses. 20. Next 7, Smyslov trades off one of black's key defenders, hoping to simplify the position and exploit the weaknesses around the black king. 20. C7, Fischer recaptures, and his queen is now a very active piece, controlling the center and ready to join the attack against the white king. 21. QF4, Smyslov repositions his queen, trying to create new threats and maintain the pressure. The queen eyes the weak c7 pawn and controls key squares. 21. Fischer finally castles his king to safety. Despite the shattered pawn cover, the king is safer on the kingside than in the center. 22. RD6, the rook invades the 6th rank, creating new threats and putting immense pressure on black's position. The white attack is still very much alive. 22. Rat8, Fischer brings his final piece into the game, challenging white's control of the d-file and preparing to create counterplay against the white king. 23. RF6, the rook moves to a more aggressive square, from where it puts pressure on the f7 pawn and supports the attack. The position is balanced on a knife's edge. 23. RD5, Fischer's rook becomes a nuisance, attacking the weak g5 pawn and creating tactical possibilities. The pressure is now on both sides of the board. 24. BG4, the bishop retreats to a more defensive square, preparing to meet black's threats on the kingside. The position is incredibly complex. 24. ND7, the knight returns to challenge white's control of the center and to create new threats. Fischer is playing with great energy and resourcefulness. 25. RF1, the rook repositions, trying to find a better square from which to participate in the attack. The position is still very unclear. 25. E3, the passed e-pawn becomes the hero. This pawn is a dagger aimed at the heart of white's position, and it will be the decisive factor in the game. 26. B3, Smyslov creates an escape square for his king, but this also creates new weaknesses on the queenside that Fischer will later exploit. 26. RD2, the rook invades the 2nd rank, creating new threats and putting immense pressure on white's position. The initiative is now firmly with black. 27. BXD7, Smyslov is forced to trade off his powerful bishop to relieve some of the pressure, but this only serves to activate black's other pieces. 27. RxD7, Fischer recaptures, and his rook on d7 is now a monster, controlling the d-file and creating new threats against the white king. 28, 1 rupee, the rook is forced into a passive defensive role, blockading the powerful passed e-pawn. White is now completely on the defensive. 28, re8, Fischer brings his final piece into the attack, creating a battery on the e-file and preparing to deliver the final blow. The pressure is unbearable. 29, h4, a desperate attempt to create some counterplay. Smyslov tries to create a passed pawn on the h-file, but it is far too slow. 29, qc5, the queen returns to the attack, putting pressure on white's weak pawns and creating new threats against the white king. The end is near. 30, qc4, Smyslov is forced to offer a queen trade to relieve the pressure, but the resulting endgame is completely lost for white. 30, qxc4, Fischer accepts the trade, knowing that his passed e-pawn and active rooks will be decisive in the endgame. The execution is flawless. 31, bxc4, Smyslov recaptures, but his pawn structure is a wreck, and his pieces are passive. The position is strategically hopeless for white. 31, rd4, the rook attacks the weak c4 pawn, creating new problems for white to solve. Fischer is playing with ruthless precision. 32, c5, Smyslov tries to create a passed pawn, but it is easily stopped. This is a sign of desperation in a lost position. 32, rxh4, the rook captures another pawn, further devastating white's position. The material is now equal, but the positional advantage for black is overwhelming. 33, c6, the pawn advances, but it is a futile gesture. The game will be decided by the attack on the white king, and this pawn is irrelevant. 33, bc8, the bishop finds a safe and useful square, from where it controls key squares and prepares to support the advance of the passed e-pawn. 34, rd6, the rook tries to create a blockade, but it is a hopeless task. The rook is the only active piece for white, but it cannot defend against the multitude of threats. 34, rc4, the rook attacks the weak c-pawn, creating new problems for white to solve. Fischer is playing with ruthless precision and efficiency. 35, kb2, the king tries to get into the game, but it is far too late. The king is a helpless spectator to the destruction of its position. 35, kg7, a useful move. The king gets off the back rank and prepares to support the advance of the passed pawns. Every move by Fischer is purposeful. 36, kb3, the king tries to create some threats, but it is a futile gesture. The game is completely lost, and these are just the last gasps. 36, rg4, the rook attacks the weak g-pawn, creating new problems for white to solve. Fischer is playing with ruthless precision, giving Smyslov no chance to survive. 37, n2, the knight is forced into a passive defensive role, where it is completely useless. The white pieces are paralyzed and can only watch. 37, re6, Fischer offers a rook trade, knowing that the resulting endgame is easily winning for him. The execution of the win is a matter of technique. 38, red 1, Smyslov declines the trade, but this only prolongs the agony. The position is completely hopeless, and the end is near. 38, rg2, the rook attacks the knight, creating new threats and forcing white to respond. The pressure is relentless and unbearable. 39, nf4, the knight is forced to move, but this only creates new weaknesses in white's position. The position is collapsing from all sides. 39, rxd6, Fischer trades rooks, simplifying the position and clarifying his path to victory. The resulting endgame is trivially winning. 40, rxd6, Smyslov recaptures, but his position is completely lost. The passed e-pawn is unstoppable, and the black pieces are too active. 40, rd2, the rook attacks the weak d-pawn, creating new problems for white to solve. Fischer is playing with ruthless precision and efficiency. 41, rd3, the rook is forced into a passive defensive role, but it cannot defend against the multitude of threats that black has created. 41, rf2, the rook attacks the knight, creating new threats and forcing white to respond. The pressure is relentless and unbearable. 42, rd4, the rook is forced to defend passively, but it cannot defend against the multitude of threats that black has created. The end is near. 42, e2, the passed pawn advances, and it is now unstoppable. The pawn will queen, and the game will be over. The execution of the win is flawless. 43, nd3, the knight tries to blockade the pawn, but it is a hopeless task. The pawn is too strong, and the black pieces are too active. 43, bf5, the bishop joins the attack, creating new threats and forcing white to respond. The coordination of black's pieces is perfect. 44, c7, a desperate attempt to create some counterplay, but it is far too slow. The game will be decided by the passed e-pawn. 44, rf3, the rook attacks the knight, creating new threats and forcing white to respond. The pressure is relentless and unbearable. 45, c8 equals q, a desperate promotion, but it is a futile gesture. The game is completely lost, and this is simply the last gasp. 45, bxc8, Fischer recaptures, and his position is completely winning. The passed e-pawn is unstoppable, and the black pieces are too active. 46, re4, the rook is forced into a passive defensive role, blockading the passed e-pawn, but it cannot defend against the multitude of threats. 46, bf5, the bishop attacks the rook, creating new threats and forcing white to respond. The pressure is relentless and unbearable. 47, rex2, Smyslov is forced to sacrifice his rook for the pawn, but the resulting endgame is still completely lost for white. 47, bxd3, Fischer recaptures, and he now has a winning rook and pawn endgame. The execution of the win is a matter of technique. 48, cxd3, Smyslov recaptures, but his position is completely lost. The black rook is too active, and the white pawns are too weak. 48, rxd3+, the rook captures another pawn with check, further devastating white's position. The material is now equal, but the positional advantage for black is overwhelming. 49, kxb4, the king captures a pawn, but it is a futile gesture. The game is completely lost, and these are just the last gasps. 49, rd5, the rook controls the fifth rank, cutting off the white king and preparing to attack the weak pawns. The position is hopeless. 50, rg2, the rook is forced into a passive defensive role, but it cannot defend against the multitude of threats that black has created. 50, h6, the h-pawn begins to march forward, creating another passed pawn and adding to white's misery. The black pawns are rolling down the board. 51, gxh6+, Smyslov is forced to exchange pawns, but this only serves to activate black's king. The position is completely lost. 51, kxh6, the king recaptures, and it is now a powerful attacking piece. The active king will be the decisive factor in the endgame. 52, a4, a desperate attempt to create some counterplay, but it is far too slow. The game will be decided by the attack on the white king. 52, g5, the g-pawn begins to march forward, creating another passed pawn and adding to white's misery. The black pawns are unstoppable. 53, rc2, the rook tries to create a blockade, but it is a hopeless task. The rook is the only active piece for white, but it cannot defend against the threats. 53, rd6, the rook controls the d-file, cutting off the white king and preparing to attack the weak pawns. The position is completely hopeless. 54, kc5, the king tries to get into the game, but it is far too late. The king is a helpless spectator to the destruction of its position. 54, re6, the rook moves to a more active square, from where it can attack the weak pawns and support the advance of the passed pawns. The end is near. 0-1.